Another Pro Football Doc podcast. This one's going to be fun for me, a distinct honor. The special guest today, someone who I was a fan of growing up, an NFL 80s all-decade player, linebacker for the New York Giants, Carl Banks. Welcome to the Pro Football Doc podcast, and I appreciate your coming on.
Doc, I really appreciate you having me, man, because I have so many questions that, some of the Giant fans are asking me that I can't answer for them. And I'm glad I'm able to get you or to be on your show so that I can get you to answer these things.
Well, I'm happy to. And, one of the things is, look, the scrubs are not a prop. They're real. And I took off my mask because this is, coming from surgery, et cetera, not related to the pandemic. And so I am still, I hope, a better orthopedic surgeon than I am a media personality or someone conducting interviews. So feel free if you want to ask me questions. To me, this is just a conversation in terms of what's going on. So I'm good with any of it, Carl. I appreciate you.
Awesome.
I see how active you are on social media and other things, and still with football. Tell me your latest take on all this, as obviously an old school guy, the OTA controversy, et cetera, which I guess is kind of ending because most people have shown up in OTAs.
Yeah, I just thought let me just say this. I'm an old school guy with new school sensitivities. I am, very in tune with the evolution of the game and how it's practiced and things of that nature. So I'm good with some of the things, but I thought it was rather reckless for the head of the Players Association to come out and say that he thought it was in players' best interest not to show up for voluntary camp, which, for the upper 5% of the league, they'll do whatever they want. And if they get injured, the team will take care of them. But these younger guys who are marginal players who are looking at 3 to 5 years max as a career, they're trying to max out their money. Plus, those are the kids that want to be in the building as much as possible, letting the coaches see, hey, I'm here, I'm working out, because they just drafted a guy to replace him or to possibly replace him. So these lower level guys, they have to be there. So when you're advising kids to leave the building, and then they go out and get hurt, and then you see in the case of the kid in Denver, he got cut. Well, it was a $10 million hit for him that probably would have been a tougher decision if the kid made it to camp. But, he's a marginal guy and making a lot of money. Well, he was trying to show that these coaches that, hey, I want to be here. I want to make this money, but I want to contribute. So getting hurt made it easy for them to say, okay, bye-bye.
Yeah, especially with a new GM, right? That wasn't the guy who signed him. And that's the one thing I always say, Carl, and you make the great point. And the main point is a one-size-fits-all solution is never the way to go. People often ask me, should you have more practice as you have less practice? Depends on the situation. Some young guys need to practice. Some old guys like to practice. Some guys don't need to practice. Like it's an individual situation. To say that even in the middle of a season, should we go with pads today or not, or whatever? Different answers for the 53 guys in terms of what it is. And so to blanketly say, don't show up, it just doesn't make sense to me. And one of the things, Carl, I've always said, and I think this is where hopefully you see it too, like it's different. Look, a different scheme may suit the coach well, may not suit you as well, or certain schemes you love more. It's not blanket. And look, LT, not the San Diego Chargers LT, but the original LT, there's some things that might have been better for LT and worse for you, and better for you and worse for LT, depending on the circumstance, right? Mm-hmm. And you can't just say blanket, this is the way that we go. And that's the same for me in terms of injuries. And that's why I say what I do is insider knowledge, not insider information. I'm not calling Ronnie Barnes, your longtime head athletic trainer, and Ronnie was there when you were there, and say, Ronnie, tell me what's going on. I'm not calling the doctors to say, tell me what's going on. They wouldn't tell me. They would say, get out of here. This is confidential and it's HIPAA. But what I'm doing is looking at the video and saying, okay, this knee injury on this player is different than the same injury on another player,
right,
in terms of the degree and reading between the lines and how it affects somebody. And that's where the insider knowledge part comes in. It's not cookie cutter, grade 2 MCL, that's 4 weeks. Oh, this is a straight line runner, he's probably okay. This is a lineman, this is his outside plant leg, this is a bigger problem. And the severity based on video. So I agree with you 100%. There just isn't one answer for everybody. And I think you're right to say, for the union to say it should be one answer, probably missed the mark.
Well, they missed the mark. And then I'm reading where in Philadelphia, they negotiated no mandatory minicamps. So I'm kind of like, there are certain jobs in this certain occupations where practice is necessary, right? If you were just finishing med school and you hadn't done a residency anywhere, I don't think they're letting you cut open a knee. You've got to have some level of experience before. So when you have these rookies and you already have an abbreviated preseason, you've got, limits on what they can do. So it's a whole new world for young players. So now you have no mini camp, no mandatory mini camp, and then training camps that are just going to be watered down. And you wonder why certain players don't develop, right? Because once you get into the season, they've mandated how much you can practice. It's no longer we can develop a guy because we can work a little bit after practice with him. It's no more of that. But then you see, a guy like Sam Darnold who doesn't work out in New York. Well, he's never had a chance to develop, right? So you throw him in the fire, you expect a microwave Pro Bowler, and it never happened. So I just think, they've got to kind of readjust their thinking on how players are being developed and what it takes to develop them. And again, I'm not saying go beat a kid in the ground, but we got to know that we've moved past the era of coaches that are just run them and grind them in the ground. These are all new school coaches. They all understand it. A lot of these guys are fresh out of college, right? If not, a lot of their staff is. So you're not going to have the old reputation of like a Frank Kush, or Bud Grant, who's just, it's different. But you've gotta allow coaches to develop players without fear that the collective is going to make a phone call and say, look, they're violating because they kept the offensive lineman out on the field for 30 minutes after practice. Well, he needed it. Well, you guys could benefit from this guy being a better football player, but coaches' hands are tied, and you have a union who's just, I'm not sure. I know they care about players, and I know they want the best for players, but they don't necessarily work in the best interest of players when they have these blanket policies.
Well, one thing that always amazed me, and I'm sure you'll agree, and this is for fans and people listening, if you take the quote 4 major sports, football, basketball, baseball, and hockey that we play here, okay? Football is the sport where I believe, having covered all 4 at some level of the professional level. Look, I've done way more football than I have basketball and hockey, but I work some with the Bulls. I work some with the Cubs, with the Timberwolves, with the Twins, with the Wild, etc. So I know it a little bit, but think about this, and this is for fans. Football is the one sport that probably, because it's big behemoth guys, get labeled dumb jocks, but it is absolutely, in my opinion, the most cerebral sport out there.
Mhm.
Look, if you can shoot a ball, look, to be Michael Jordan, you have to be athletic, great, and smart, right? But if all you can do is shoot a ball, you're still make it in the league. If all you can do is skate or stick handle, you'll make it in the NHL. If you can just hit a ball and you don't know what's coming, but you can great hands and turn your hips on the ball and hit it out, you'll still be in the league. Now, you may not hit like Tony Gwynn, but you'll still, there's a place for you.
Sure.
But in the NFL, look, if you can't stay on sides, if you don't know your gap responsibility, you don't know when the shift of the play happens, where you go, you can't be on the field. And that's just on the defensive side, much less the offensive side.
Mhm.
I've had one player tell me, and I won't even say what school he was at, but he was a linebacker. And 3 years in the league, he said something to me. He goes, man, I'm still learning. This is so difficult. In college, and I won't say the name of the school because you might be able to identify him. He goes, they just told me to get the ball. I mean, all I did was get the ball. If the quarterback had it, I got the quarterback. Right? I just was taught to get the ball. And his athleticism was so good, he got drafted fairly high in the NFL.
Sure.
But when he got to the NFL, you just can't do that kind of situation.
Well, no, you can't, because the other guys get paid too, and other coaches get paid to game plan against you. And, you know, depending on what conference you're in college, you're going to be, you know, if you're an SEC player, you're going to get great coaching. If you're in some of the lower level conferences, you're playing two coverages and, you know, everything is simplified. So when you get to the league, it's speculative, but it also, they have to speculate on your mental capacity to grow and to learn how to play pro football once they determine that you have the athleticism. So it is a very nuanced sport, and I would venture to say it is the most complex. And then, you know, I've had this, some people argue me as it relates to the off season, and they say, well, football is the only sport, the only professional sport that has an off season. Well, I don't know if there's another sport that you can't go out and pick up a ball and shoot it by yourself, or hit off a pitching machine, or, you know, hit a tennis ball up against the wall. There are so many things about football where you almost need to have organized practices, because if you don't, you're not really getting ready to play football. You know, that's the intricacy of football. So that's the reason why there is an off season, to whatever level they're gonna, you know, fix this thing. But you do need an off season in a sport like football. And I was teasing a kid on social media. I said, heck, to be good at Madden, you even got to practice. You know, it's just like, you know, if you want to go be good in basketball and you want to go work on something, what are you going to work on? You want to shoot? You want to dribble? You can do it. Pick up a ball and do it, right? You can't do that in football. You know, you can't run routes against cover two and it's air. You know, you can't beat man coverage if there's no man coverage there, right? You can't work on your shifts in motion if you're a quarterback in the timing of a route if you have no one to throw to. So it's just there's a reason why there's an off season for football.
Well, that certainly absolutely makes sense, right? Because it's not a sport that you can do alone. So what's your feeling on preseason games and perhaps the now 17 game schedule?
I don't have a problem with the 3 preseason games. In fact, I don't have a problem with the 17 game schedule, as long as they can increase the roster size. Is really what it comes down to. If you can put the right amount of personnel on a roster on game day or throughout the season, I think you can manage a 17 game season. But if you have limited rosters, it'll start to wear on some guys, I think. If not physically, mentally, and then once it hits you mentally, then physically you'll probably start to decline a bit.
Yeah, I would have preferred an 18-week season with 16 games instead of 17, but 2 byes, one in the first half, one in the second half. You still get 18 weeks of football, right? The Giants would only play 16 weeks, but you still get 18 weeks of football. The way it's agnostic and everyone watches all games now, and it also would allow you not to have short rest games. Like you play coming off a bye after 11 days, and then you get 10 days before your next game. And a lot of times, a team that gets a bye in week 4 says, holy smokes, we don't have a bye the rest of the way. Or a team that's itching to get a bye, but they don't have it till week 12 or 13 or something. It's a long ways out. And, TV's how the money's made. So you'd have an extra slate of games, an extra Sunday night football, Monday night football, Thursday night football. Heck, you could even throw in a Wednesday night football if you wanted, right? If you wanted. So, but I don't think 17 games is horrible. But yeah, it's one more exposure. But to your other point about practice, I forgot to say this. The stats show this year, and we'll talk about it in part 2 of the Pro Football podcast. Part 1 is a guest interview. You're welcome to stay for part 2, but I respect your time. And we'll talk about how injuries, especially at the start of the season, regular season, increased. And there's such a thing as acclimation injury. Like until you get used to football, there are some things that are more likely to happen. So the injuries that got pushed out of the preseason because there were no preseason games got pushed into the first few weeks of the regular season. And that's what you speak to. You can't mimic football. Very, very difficult. All right. How else has the game changed? And where would you have today, given your skill set, done better? And where would it have been harder for you based on how the game has changed?
Oh, wow. The game is, in my opinion, easier. People say, well, it's a passing league and, you have to be more athletic. You have to be, I think I would be more of a hybrid player, just given my skill set. But I don't know if there's a lot that I would have to change about the game or that I would be ill-equipped to change. I heard Ronnie Lott talk about this once when people say, well, Ronnie, you couldn't play in today's game because, some of the hits that you used to put on people would be outlawed. He says, you're assuming I'm not smart enough to make the adjustments, right? And that,
I can hear Ronnie's voice saying those words very calmly.
So that's kind of how I understood the game. And see, the thing about it too, Doc, is I learned the game fundamentally at a very early age. So I was fortunate enough to fear tackling with my head down or tackling head first, because I had from age 8 a coach that would spend half of practice showing us how to get in proper position to tackle. So I missed the ESPN big hit era, right? So all I knew was good, sound fundamental tackles and fearing that I would break my neck if I tried to tackle with my head down, seeing the target. And then the rest just became fundamental football. I don't think that's ever going to change in the NFL. The good fundamental players and the good fundamental teams still do the best in the league. I don't know where I would have to change where I was not capable of. I was an every down player because Belichick had us so interchangeable that we could do, we had to do everybody's position. So I would probably have my hand in the dirt probably a little more now. But I think that's pretty much it because, I was an all-state basketball player, played a little bit at Michigan State, in the JV before they dismantled it. So I'm totally athletic enough to play in today's game, and probably more multidimensional. But the one thing that I think you can answer about how the game has changed since I played, right? The evolution of not only surgeries in return to play, but the evolution of the therapies, if you will, or the rehab. Because, if you even go from let's say Gale Sayers to Adrian Peterson, right? Adrian Peterson gets a total knee, and he comes back and he plays tremendous, right? And back in the 70s, there just wasn't the knowledge, if you will, or
Right.
the know-how, right?
Yeah, and here's what I've often said. Back in the 70s and certainly 60s, I mean, Joe Namath had an ACL tear like Adrian Peterson. But at the time, we didn't know really what it was, right? They put a brace on. It was called a trick knee. It was a knee sprain. Everything was a knee sprain. Kind of like, Carl, today, we call everything a concussion and we call it the same. Well, that's like just saying it's a knee sprain. Eventually, and with MRIs for knees, ACLs, PCLs, partials, meniscus, we learned all these things. Heck, as you know, we used to cut out meniscus and think they were like an appendix and they're not needed.
Yeah.
Now we know that we get arthritis when that happens. We're in that infancy when it comes to head injuries because let's say you get a momentary hit and you see stars for 2 seconds, but you're fine. That's called a concussion. You get knocked out and are conscious for 5 minutes and a pseudo seizure, and we call that a concussion, right? And so ultimately, we're going to get to an era where there's a grade 2B temporal lobe concussion and it's treated this way, and a grade 3C occipital concussion, and this is what you need to avoid, or this is, and these maybe are the ones that are more linked to CTE and you have to wait longer, or really what is CTE, right? We're in our infancy.
Right.
There's way more we don't know about concussions than we do know. I feel like it's the 1960s and 70s when it comes to knees, right? And so we're going to get better with that. So there's no question it has come a long way.
So here's one I have to ask you. So if we take Adrian Peterson, and you say no two knee injuries are the same, but Giant fans are asking, so what are the expectations for Saquon Barkley? Like he's rehabbing, but
Great.
his knee injury, his style of play, he's a certain burst type of guy, quick change of direction, and fans want to know. So what's the expectation there? Adrian Peterson came back and had a great year. Can you expect the same thing for a guy like Saquon Barkley?
Great, and thank you for asking. I was going to turn the floor over to you for the end to be fair, and for the listeners here, this is our first time actually chatting and meeting. And by your quote, I really appreciate, because you obviously follow the stuff that I said on Twitter and otherwise, and I follow what you said. No two injuries are the same. And what happens is in the media, it's labeled an ACL, but it's an ACL plus what? Plus nothing is different than plus something or plus a lot. And that's what I don't fully know about Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley, however, I believe, if I remember correctly in the hit, and in game, during the game, and I don't like being the bearer of bad news, I was tweeting and at profootballdoc.com saying, I even did a video saying, this is why, this is the replay. I think he's done for the year and he's tore his ACL, and I believe, and MCL. The good news is the MCL does heal. The question is how much meniscus, how much articular cartilage damage he does or does not have. And there's no way for me to know that. But I can tell you right now, here's what he has going for him. The MCL usually heals without surgery, so it's not as big a deal. It was an early season injury, so he's got a longer runway to come back. His videos have looked very good so far that I've seen on social media, although those are just snippets and you can't tell completely. And of course, he is a beast, right? And if you're I'll give you an analogy, another New York Giant. And I said this at the time, Jason Pierre-Paul, with the unfortunate fireworks accident. If you're the first or second or top player on the 53, you still will have a career. Sure. If you're the 53rd guy and that happens to you, you're gone. That same year, I forget his name, there was a defensive back with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers who had something also with his hand related to fireworks. And he's a DB and he's out of the league. Does it affect JPP? I said he's going to come back, and because this is the grip, and he's lost some of this is the grip, it's still going to help him. But he would be even better, and obviously he's the Super Bowl champion now and the whole deal again and the whole deal. But because he's that good, even if he's now here, he's going to be fine. And I think that's
Right.
Saquon Barkley, right? I mean, if you're Saquon Barkley, you're here. And okay, even if you lose a little bit, and fans should bear with him, he had an earlier injury. He might, statistically, you have a slower start and then you work yourself back into it. You know, people come back quickly, but it's really a year and a half before you say you've forgotten about it, right? And you're not doing anything different. So look for him to be there week one, to be great, because he is just that great, but to be even better the second half of the season is what I see. And so far, I'm relatively optimistic for those reasons. But the other thing is, you got to remember, as an offensive player, yes, he's reacting to the defense, but for the most part, you're able to dictate the action more so than if you were a linebacker, more so than if you were a DB. So that helps him also some, based on the position and what it is. I'm not saying he's a robot, he's going to make this cut no matter what, but he has more choices to make. Whereas you as a defender just have to instantaneously react. And that's what makes it harder as you come back. So with all that, I think I'm relatively optimistic. This will be my second year playing fantasy, I think. And if he drops and people think he's bad, I'll take him.
So the other one that I had really quick for you is, I want you to talk about like how far we've come in the last, let's say, 10 years with Achilles injuries, because I'm looking at Kevin Durant, right? And, I've seen different levels of people return from Achilles, and it seems like each and every year you start to see a higher level of return to play, the explosion coming back and things of that nature. Can you talk about just how far we've come with just what we're doing with Achilles?
Look, I love these questions, and look at. I love how you flip the script on me, which I love. And look, if you ever want to come on with you, I'm more than happy to return the favor. And it's a lot of things to talk about here. And for the Achilles, look, I was confident that Kevin Durant will return to himself, right? And that's another example of he's just so good and dominant that he's gonna get back there. Is he 100% himself, or is he 98%? Hard to say. He's just that good that he's doing very well. And I said at the time that if I were a team, I would sign him, max contract him, the whole deal. And sometimes we're prisoners of the moment, whether just because Adrian Peterson had a great recovery, all ACLs should, or just because Kobe Bryant's career basically fizzled out because of an Achilles, they all will. Well, Kobe was at the end of his career. As he came back, he got another knee injury. It wasn't just the Achilles, etc. But my better example all along was Dominique Wilkins, who came back from his Achilles. And yes, rehab is better and the whole deal. But in terms of the big changes, Carl, what I see is this. As players get bigger, faster, stronger, we're seeing more knee and ankle and Achilles injuries, because as the tree grows bigger, stronger, there's more wind and force, the roots are the same. You're planting a bigger tree, a bigger plant in the same size pot, right? And you want shoes that stick and cut and make you cut on a dime, which generate force. And I know there's been some controversy about the stadium in New York, MetLife Stadium, and the turf. Well, players want that good footing, but that's like a ski racer cranking the binding super tight. Whereas mine, I want them kind of loose because I don't want to hurt my knee. So when you have great footing, you make great plays, but if it goes south, you can get hurt. So as players get bigger, faster, stronger, shoe wear, surfaces, you see more. Now I look at it, I've been saying this a lot, the dreaded A's, both of them, ACL and Achilles, both surgery, both season enders, right? And Achilles creeping up on ACLs. And here's the thing, in your prime, your ACL and Achilles was not much bigger or is the same size as it is for you today. And my ACL and Achilles is not that far off from LT's, I mean, because you get bigger, faster, stronger, but that ACL rope and that Achilles rope is about the same size. And literally, it's the muscle force that tears it. See, when you get older, when you're 50, it's weakness in the tendon that tears the Achilles. When you tear it when you're in your 20s, it's the immediate strength and the quick fire eccentric load of strong muscles that tears it. It's a muscle that's too strong, not a tendon that's too weak. So there are differences in how that works.
Oh, wow. And so, so on the muscle part, because we also see, like, coming from an ACL surgery or a knee surgery or an Achilles surgery, part of that return to play, guys end up with some type of like hamstring or calf soreness, or they miss time because there's some soreness in those two areas. Is that because the load is readjusting?
Yeah, well, I mean, injuries beget injuries, right? And
Mm-hmm.
when there are some ways around it, the blood flow restriction therapy is a good way to help out what's going on. But when you're protecting the Achilles, you're not working your calf, and then the left side of your body, the right side of the body weaker. If the left side of your body's weaker, the right side overcompensates, and maybe you get something else. So there's all sorts of injury cascade that can happen. We're better at it now than in the past. And also in the second part of the podcast today, switching sports, but everyone knows Tommy John surgery, right? I have a picture where it's the anniversary of Tommy John surgery, and he was put in a cast after surgery. Nobody does that today. You start early range of motion type things. So that's part of the evolution of what happens in medicine. And look, one day down the road, I'll look back and say, really, I did that when I was in the NFL? That's silly, right? I mean, that's part of the evolution of what happens. Great conversation here. I told you 15, 20 minutes. We're on 30, so hopefully you're not mad at me. I didn't even get to my other question, like, give me your best Belichick story or your best LT story, right? As some fun things. If you want to hit those now, or we'll come back another time, or what have you. Tell me what your time frame is.
Well, I got a few more minutes, but
All right.
The Belichick stories are they're not really great stories. Like he's he's a fan of rock and roll music, which a lot of people don't realize just given his demeanor. But just one of the greatest teachers in the game, and his big challenge to players, especially for a guy like Lawrence or myself or Leonard Marshall, when he wants something more from us, he'll be in a film room and he'll say, I would expect a guy with your skill and ability that you could make this play over and over again. And it's just kind of like, it's something that he's going to ask us to do outlandish that he hasn't sprung on us yet. So he always greased the skids by saying, Lawrence, a guy with your skill and ability, I mean, there's not a lot you can't do. So here's what we're going to have you do, and it could be the craziest thing. And you're looking at like, okay, we'll go do it then. But he was so good at challenging and getting the best out of his players. But, you mentioned that when we were talking about practice, how with LT, certain things could be different for him than it is for me, right? Well, I can attest 100% that things were different for me than the way he saw them. He was a guy, Doc, when I tell you he saw the game differently, and you've been around really gifted players, and when you see it, you're like, wow, this guy he's seeing it differently than everyone else. And so case in point, Lawrence is famous for his nightlife, and he gives me permission to tell this story. It's kind of funny. But on a Friday, we're installing our pass rush for the Washington Redskins at that time, the Washington football team. And so Thursday night, Lawrence is out all night. He doesn't get in until after lunch, into our meetings. And as soon as he comes in, we're in our pass rush meeting, and he's literally under a table with sunglasses on, sleep. And so we're in this meeting for probably 30, 40 minutes. And our defensive line coach, he's running film. He stops the film. He draws some stuff up. and he's just trying to figure out what our pass rush is going to be against Washington. And so we're back and forth with this for like, I would say 30, 45 minutes. And then he just had enough because Lawrence has not participated. He is sleeping, dead out, right? And so he stops everything, cuts the lights on, and he says, God damn it, Lawrence, you would think that you would at least wake up for the pass rush part of this meeting, right? And so Lawrence sits up, he takes his glasses, and he's like, what are you talking about, right? So he says, cut the film on. Lawrence looked at 2 plays, literally. It took probably 3 minutes of film. He says, cut the film off. He gets up, cuts the lights on, goes to the whiteboard, draws up our pass rush, and tells us why and how it affects everybody on the defense, right? And he did it, and he looks at the coach, and the coach is like, and I've been here an hour trying to figure this out. And he literally drew up our pass rush game plan for that game. And he's looking at the coach, he says, can I go back to sleep now? And he just cut the lights off. He started, the room burst out laughing. But we were all trying to figure out how we were going to pass rush the Washington offensive line. And he literally saw 2 plays, or just a random 2 plays. And he says, Joe Jacoby is this, we have to do this. Bostic is this, we have to do, Mark May is this, yeah. And he just drew it up. He drew up like 5 different pass rushes for each situation. And it was like, wow, this guy sees it differently.
Okay, so my follow-up question is, when Lawrence Taylor said that, can I go back to sleep now? What did the coach say?
He didn't say anything. Lawrence got the lights off and he went back to sleep. But the other thing about that too, is gifted as he was, the one thing that really no one really knows about him is that he practiced extremely hard. So whenever it was time for the defense to practice, he pretty much practiced at game speed. Like whatever it took, once he got on the practice field, he practiced as hard as he played. And that was probably the one thing people didn't know about. They thought it, everything came easy, which it did, but he really applied it in practice. He really worked hard at it.
All right. Well, Carl, thank you so much. So please let me return the favor sometime. We're going to take a quick break, Pro Football Doc podcast, before we go through our potpourri and video stuff. I appreciate the over 30 minutes